Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Two Pakistani soldiers have embraced martyrdom after Indian Army violated ceasefire in Khuratta sector along the line of control. Pakistani Army's media wing says two Indian soldiers were also killed after Pakistani troops responded befittingly. Pakistan has called upon the international community to hold India accountable for human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. In a statement on International Human Rights Day, the Foreign Office said India should be urged to accept a United Nations inquiry into the situation in the occupied valley. It said the world must focus oppressed Kashmiri people who are being denied their right to self-determination for over 7 decades. Iran says it is ready for US return to the 2015 nuclear deal. In an interview, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says Washington needs to fulfill its commitments to the pact. He says President-elect Joe Biden should know that certain issues, including Iran's missile program, are not negotiable. Biden has indicated his willingness to return to the 2015 deal so long as Iran also comes back into compliance. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and European Union Chief Ursula von der Leyen have failed to break the deadlock in the post-Brexit trade talks. In a statement following her meeting with Johnson, Leyen said the two sides remain far apart on reaching a deal. But she said the two sides have agreed to continue negotiations till Sunday in an effort to reach an agreement. The United States has reported over 3,000 COVID-19 deaths for the first time since the pandemic began, as its toll crossed 289,000. In India, the virus has claimed more than 141,000 lives and infected over 9.76 million people. Meanwhile, Pakistan's death tally has crossed 8,600, with 56 new deaths and over 3,000 cases overnight, while the global COVID-19 death toll has surpassed 1.5 million, while the number of infections has exceeded 68.8 million. And in football, Real Madrid have defeated Borussia Mönchengladbach 2-0 in their UEFA Champions League fixture. Karim Benzema's two headers sent Madrid into the knockout stages. Mönchengladbach have also qualified for the last 16. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Two Pakistani soldiers have been martyred in Indian ceasefire violations in the Khuratta sector along the line of control. In a tweet, the Pakistani Army spokesperson Major General Babar Iftikhar identified the troops as Lance Naik Tariq and Sepoy Zaroof. He said Pakistani troops responded befittingly and killed two Indian soldiers. India has committed more than 2,000 ceasefire violations in 2020 alone. Now, the International Human Rights Day is being celebrated today across the world. UN Human Rights Watch has wished day to everyone and shared 2020's best human rights stories. However, worldwide human rights violations are as rampant today as they ever have been. More on human rights and their violations in this report. As the world celebrates the International Human Rights Day, the South Asian region remains mired in gross rights violations. The plight of Kashmiris under Indian occupation and the persecution and oppression of minorities in India dominate the human rights violations in the region. Several international human rights monitors have repeatedly highlighted India's status as human rights violator. From thousands slaughtered in occupied Kashmir under Indian tyranny to hundreds of thousands rendered stateless in India by New Delhi, the list of India's gruesome human rights violations is long and painful. Pakistan has called upon the international community to hold India accountable for human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. In a statement, the Foreign Office said India should be urged to accept a United Nations inquiry into the situation in the occupied valley. It said the world must focus oppressed Kashmiri people who are being denied their right to self-determination for over 7 decades. The Foreign Office added the Kashmiri people's suffering has increased manifolds during the pandemic. The Foreign Office said on the day Pakistan reaffirms its resolve to promote the human rights agenda without any discrimination. Meanwhile, India's jingoistic and hegemonic designs, its state-sponsored militancy in Pakistan, and continuous ceasefire violations is another chapter altogether. From sending intelligence operatives to sponsor insurgency in the north, back band outfits in Balochistan, to funding extremist factions in Karachi, to fueling sectarianism in Punjab, New Delhi has been a constant threat to regional peace and human rights. India's expansionist designs have threatened human rights in other neighboring countries, including China and Nepal. While the world constantly urges India to check its behavior, New Delhi's inhumane actions continue to make life hell for millions in the region. Well, international shame for India begins as an independent NGO. EU DISINFO Lab has uncovered a global network of pro-Indian fake websites aimed at influencing decision-making at the United Nations and the European Union. Operating in 116 countries, the network of over 550 websites is aimed at producing and amplifying content to undermine Pakistan and China. Now, the disinformation watchdogs at the operation created several NGOs in charge of events favoring Indian interests. It said the operation had resurrected several dead officials at the UN and used their names in fake reports and statements. EU DISINFO Lab said Indian actors circulated content from fake news outlets on national news agencies targeting audiences worldwide. The network was also found involved in garnering support from international institutions against its rivals. Now, for more on this, we have been joined by Najmuddin Sheikh, a former diplomat from Karachi. Sir, thank you very much for your time. Now, Pakistan has been alerting the world of India's propagandist activities. With Pakistan's stance being vindicated, how massive is the scale of this revelation?
Well, I think that what has now been printed is a damning indictment of, the publishers of this report have tried not to be very careful and have not suggested that the Indian government or an Indian intelligence agency is behind it. But everything points towards this, and I think that the next report that they write will pinpoint it more clearly. Right now, we need to look at the Shrivastava group. We need to look at ANI, which calls itself the largest wire agency in India, and which says it has 100 bureaus. All these seem to be put together in order to defame Pakistan. And that, surprisingly, well, they said that they had published something last year. But what I found interesting was that they've been doing this for the last 15 years, and we have not been able to put together a picture that we can present to the United Nations Human Rights Commission and to other UN organizations or to the EU and to other organizations which have been used for defaming us. For instance, this report talks about the fact that the European Union has now pinpointed European Chronicles as one of the papers that should be banned, that is obviously being used for defamatory purposes, etc.
Right. Also, Mr. Sheikh, tell us, how should the international bodies react to such massive intentional Indian operation to mislead them?
There is a question of whether or not this can be taken up with in the United Nations Security Council as a threat to peace and stability in the region. We must go to each one of the human rights bodies in Geneva, in New York, and we must pinpoint the campaign that on which the DISINFO has provided a lot of information. We should ask that they carry out an investigation of ANI. They should carry out an investigation of Srivastava Group and the links that these seem to have all over India, all over not just India, but all over the world, where they have managed to establish these subsidiary bodies. How much are they paying these bodies? How are they subsidizing them? This is something that needs to be looked at. We may not have the resources, but if we can pinpoint these, then the Human Rights Commission and others can investigate this more fully. I think Ms. Robinson, for instance, would be one of the people to whom you would send this and ask that more action be taken.
Absolutely, Mr. Najmuddin Sheikh, former diplomat. Sir, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. Now moving on, US President-elect Joe Biden's son, Hunter, has said his tax affairs are under investigation by the federal prosecutors in Delaware. Hunter Biden says he took the case very seriously, but is confident he has handled his affairs legally and appropriately. The prosecutors are also scrutinizing some of Hunter's Chinese business dealings and other transactions. In a statement, Biden-Harris transition team said Hunter had fought through difficult challenges only to emerge stronger. The 50-year-old Hunter Biden was persistently criticized by the Republicans during the 2020 election campaign over alleged quid pro quo in Ukraine and China. He struck his business deals when Biden was vice president. The investigation comes as President-elect Biden assembles his cabinet to take charge of the country in January. Meanwhile, Iran says it's ready for U.S. return to the 2015 nuclear deal. In an interview, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Washington needs to fulfill its commitment to the pact. He said it was a legal agreement reached between Iran and 6 world powers and enshrined in UN Security Council resolutions 2231. He said President-elect Joe Biden should know that certain issues, including Iran's missile program, are not negotiable. Biden has indicated his willingness to return to the 2015 deal so long as Iran also comes back into compliance. Also, Iran has imposed sanctions on the U.S. ambassador to Yemen. Iran's foreign ministry says the envoy was blacklisted for his role in the occurrence of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. The ministry said the crisis is the biggest tragedy of the century perpetrated by a US-led coalition that wishes to break up Yemen. It said the envoy was designated under a law approved by the Iranian parliament in 2017. The law aims at combating the violations of human rights and the adventurism and terroristic acts of the US in the region. Now, this comes a day after the US sanctioned Tehran's envoy to the embattled country. Moving on, the U.S. Senate has defeated an attempt to block a $23 billion arms sale to the UAE. 2 procedural votes failed to gain a majority of 100-member Senate. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said the resolutions fell far short of the 2/3 support that would be needed to overcome a presidential veto. The bipartisan bills were jointly sponsored by 2 Democrats and a Republican senator. Only 2 Democrats opposed the resolutions, while only 1 Republican supported them. President Donald Trump had issued a formal threat to veto congressional efforts to block the planned transfer. The sale is tied to a normalization of ties between the UAE and Israel under the Abraham Accords. Moving on, China says it will revoke visa exemption treatment for U.S. diplomat passport holders visiting Hong Kong and Macau. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying announced this at a news conference in Beijing. Hua said curbs include members of Congress personnel at non-governmental organizations and their family members. The U.S. earlier imposed financial sanctions and a travel ban on 14 Chinese officials. They were targeted over their role in adopting a national security law for Hong Kong and Beijing's disqualification last month of the elected opposition legislators in the territory. Now, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and European Union Chief Ursula von der Leyen have failed to break the deadlock in the post-Brexit trade talks. In a statement following her meeting with Johnson, Leyen said the two sides remain far apart on reaching a deal. Leyen said the two sides have agreed to continue negotiations till Sunday in an effort to reach an agreement. Prime Minister Boris Johnson returned to London after the meeting in Brussels. Johnson's spokesperson said very large gaps remained, but talks will continue with a firm decision to reach a deal by Sunday. The United Kingdom's chief negotiator Lord Frost and European Union's Michel Barnier are set to resume talks in Brussels. Now, France is pressing ahead with a law. It says it will crack down on practices that go against the values of the country. But critics fear it will alienate and stigmatize the French Muslim community. Earlier, Prime Minister Jean Castex defended the draft legislation and said the text does not target religious freedom. The proposed law includes tougher measures against online apologists for acts of violence and checks on anyone who educates their child outside mainstream schools. The legislation has been criticized by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, while the U.S. envoy on international religious freedom expressed concern over the bill. Now, the International Criminal Court has announced to send a delegation to Libya to inspect the mass graves unearthed in the city of Tarhuna. In a statement, Libyan army said the delegation will also investigate those involved in the war crimes. Earlier in July, ICC sent a team to investigate war crimes committed by forces loyal to Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar. So far, a total of 112 corpses have been found in more than 20 mass graves in Tarhuna since it was recaptured by the Libyan government. Now, moving to Iraq, where two wells in a small oil field in the north have been set ablaze by explosive in a terrorist attack. In a statement, the oil ministry said the overall production from the field was not affected. The state-run North Oil Company said technical teams have isolated the two burning wells. The ministry said production from the two wells that were targeted did not exceed 2,000 barrels per day. ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack without providing any evidence to back up its claim. Meanwhile, at least 5 army personnel have been killed in a military convoy ambush near the town of Guri El in central Somalia. The military said 3 soldiers have also been wounded after gunmen attacked their vehicle. It said the convoy was attacked by gunmen from 3 different directions outside the town. The military said the attack took place as the Somali National Army personnel were returning from a training workshop in Guri El town. Now, this comes after the army announced a military operation against Somali-based Al-Qaeda-affiliated group Al-Shabaab. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Also, Ethiopia's federal forces have rescued over 1,000 military officers in an operation in the country's northmost Tigray region. In a statement, the army said Tigray People's Liberation Front abducted the officers on 3rd of November after inviting them for a dinner. It said the freed officers also included the deputy commander of Ethiopian Army's Northern Command. Meanwhile, the UN Human Rights Chief says the situation in Ethiopia is extremely volatile and distressing. In a news conference, Michelle Bachelet said fighting is reportedly continuing in the restive Tigray region. She raised alarms over reports of indiscriminate attacks against civilians and sexual violence against women. Now, thousands have died and nearly 50,000 fled to Sudan after last month's fighting between Tigrayan rebels and government troops. Moving on, Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has won a second 4-year term in office. The Election Commission announced the results following a tightly contested vote that was tainted by violence. Akufo-Addo won over 51% of the vote against his old rival John Mahama, who got 47% of the ballots. Mahama's party said it rejected the results, calling the election flawed and discredited. Akufo-Addo has promised to implement a $17 billion program to boost growth in one of West Africa's largest economies. Earlier, 5 people were shot dead in election violence. In a statement, police said it recorded 21 cases of violence. Now, the US has reported more than 3,000 coronavirus-related deaths in a single day for the first time. The nationwide death toll has crossed 289,000. Meanwhile, India has recorded more than 141,000 fatalities and 9.76 million cases. While globally, the virus has claimed more than 1.5 million lives and infected 68 million people. Details in this report.
Allergic reactions, cyber attacks, record cases, makeshift container hospitals, uncertainty over virus origin, and some cheers dominated the COVID-19 scene over the last 24 hours. Confusion reigned supreme court on the European continent, where Germany's BioNTech firm said its vaccine regulation documents were unlawfully accessed after a cyber attack on Europe's medicine regulator. A report has found that coronavirus was spreading in Italy as early as mid-November 2019. 3 months before the first local transmission was detected. Meanwhile, as UK authorities warn people with anaphylaxis history to not get vaccinated after 2 health workers developed allergic reactions, top US infectious disease expert has also cautioned Americans with underlying allergies.
Who do have underlying allergic phenomenon that they might be cautious about vaccination, or at least be prepared to respond with some sort of anecdote to the allergic reaction. So if I were a person that had an underlying allergic tendency, I might want to be prepared that I might get a reaction and therefore be ready to treat it.
The U.S. states of North Carolina, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and many others have reported record hospitalizations. Officials say the availability of intensive care beds is under pressure as the country moves towards a very dark phase of the pandemic. Meanwhile, Canada became the 3rd state after the UK and Bahrain to approve the Pfizer vaccine.
As you know, the Government of Canada has announced that we now have an agreement that will see us receive up to 249,000 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine in December 2020. At this moment, we now have the first authorized COVID-19 vaccine through Health Canada's rigorous testing and regulatory process.
Over in Australia, scientists have developed a rapid genome sequencing method which will cut the time required to trace the source of coronavirus cases to 4 hours. As the latest wave shows little sign of abating in South Korea, authorities say they will be building hospital beds in shipping containers.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 56 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to 8,603. The Health Ministry says over 3,000 people tested positive for the disease overnight. The ministry said there are more than 46,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of more than 429,000 countrywide cases, over 374,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 189,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 125,000 cases, while in the capital, Islamabad, over 33,000 have been infected so far. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has reaffirmed that the eradication of polio remains a key priority of his government. Khan thus said this in a phone call with Bill Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Prime Minister highlighted that anti-polio campaigns are being strengthened across the country. He added that a team from Pakistan will continue to collaborate with the Gates Foundation for the eradication of polio. The Prime Minister shared Pakistan's policy to control and mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on health and economy. Bill Gates hailed Pakistan's effort to combat the pandemic while stimulating economic growth. Now, the U.S. state of New York has filed a lawsuit against Facebook alleging it broke antitrust law. At a news conference, state's Attorney General Letitia James said she led a bipartisan coalition of 48 attorney generals from around the nation in filing a lawsuit against the social network giant. James accused Facebook of using its monopoly power to crush smaller rivals. She said the company acquired potential rivals before they could threaten its dominance. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is also filing a suit against the social media giant. With June lawsuits, Facebook becomes the second tech company to face a major legal challenge this fall.
Just a few minutes ago, I led a bipartisan coalition of 48 attorneys general from around the nation. and filing a lawsuit against the social networking giant Facebook. For nearly a decade, Facebook has used its dominance and monopoly power to crush smaller rivals and snuff out competition, all at the expense of everyday users.
Now, United States President Donald Trump's childhood home is up for sale for the fourth time in 4 years. The home is set to a bloated $3 million target price that the auctioneer hopes his admirers will pay. Details in this report.
When Donald Trump's childhood home in Queens was on the market 4 years ago, he was then a candidate for president and publicly mused about buying it himself. Now, he might not have to. The home's latest owner is launching a crowdfunding campaign with the goal of giving the 5-bedroom Tudor in Jamaica Estates to the president as a gift. But this will happen once the $3 million price tag is met.
The property is owned by an investor who purchased it from one of our previous auctions, which was held actually on January 17th, 2017, 3 days before Trump was inaugurated. And that investor is now looking to sell the property. We're raising money to purchase the property and then donate it to Trump or a charity of his choice.
Trump's late father Fred built the 5-bedroom home with a fireplace and narrow driveway in 1940. In 1950, when Trump was 4, Fred moved the family into a grand 23-room mansion he built on 2 lots behind the backyard. The house was advertised on Airbnb in 2017 with photos of life-size Trump cardboard cutouts in the rooms with bunk beds for over $700 a night. Trump can donate the funds to a charity or turn the property into a presidential library, museum, or national historic site.
As long as $3 million or more is raised, 50% of the proceeds above that goal will be donated to a charity. If sufficient funds aren't raised, that will also all be donated to charity. All proceeds.
The campaign raised $125 by last night, including from Trump haters. Paramount Realty first sold the house in 2016 for about $1.4 million for a family who had lived there for 7 or 8 years. The buyer hired Paramount to flip it.
In Pakistan's Punjab province, the BOHR mansion of Kalabagh city, once a lavish tourist attraction for world leaders, had long been known as a forgotten marvel. Mansion is now being revamped by the custodian family, who is also designing Pakistan's first tourism city in Kalabagh. More in this report by our correspondent, Sumaira Khan.
Kalabagh is northwestern town of Punjab and the state of Pakistan's former governor Nawab Malik Amir Khan. The beautiful town holds the iconic BOHR mansion, hill ranges, agricultural land and above all, Indus River. The Nawabs are now working towards developing a tourism city which will serve as an economic overturn for the centuries-old town.
We have taken the initiative ourselves and we want to promote tourism over here because we want to initiate economic activity related to tourism for the local population over here. Because as more people will start discovering Kalabagh, more people from the other parts of Pakistan will start coming to Kalabagh. They will start to see the local handicrafts, they will start to see the natural beauty, and that will generate an interest among the local population to start catering to those tourists.
Kalabagh Estate has also been hosting species preservation and controlled hunting. The city also has polo grounds, stables, water sports and much more. According to the descendants, BOHR mansion and local delicacies will be promoted to world leaders in particular as part of said tourism city.
Old Bangla was constructed in the 1930s by my great-grandfather Malik Amir Khan, who was later governor of West Pakistan. He hosted many dignitaries from all over the world, including Queen Elizabeth and even Jackie Kennedy. Kalabagh is a city with a lot of potential for tourism, but tourism has never been developed in Kalabagh before. We've got a river nearby, we've got historical salt mines, got a historical town, one of the oldest towns on the River Indus. So we really wanted to promote tourism here because no one has ever done it before, and we see this as a huge tourism hub, not only for local tourists, but even for foreign tourists in the future.
Being blessed with a full range of tourism attractions in Pakistan, both the government and private sectors are coming forward to reconnoiter these potentials to their fullest. Sumaira Khan, Indus News, Miawali, Punjab, Pakistan.
Now in business news, most European stocks have edged up slightly as markets track the state of Brexit trade deal talks between the UK and European Union. London's FTSE 100, Italy's FTSE MIB and the CAC 40 in Paris have also edged up marginally. Frankfurt's DAX is hovering around the flat line, but the European stock 600 has declined fractionally, with tech stocks failing. Earlier in Asia, all major bourses shed except for mainland Chinese stocks. Now in football, Real Madrid have defeated Borussia Mönchengladbach 2-0 in their UEFA Champions League fixture. Karim Benzema's two headers sent Madrid into the knockout stages.
Mönchengladbach have also qualified for the last 16. In a Group H match, Paris Saint-Germain hammered Istanbul Başakşehir 5-1. Neymar scored his third Champions League hat-trick to secure win for the French. The win moves PSG to the top of the Group H with 12 points. In a Group A fixture, Bayern Munich beat Lokomotiv Moscow 2-0 to remain atop group with 16 points. Niklas Süle and Eric Maxim scored one each for Bayern. In a Group C competition, Manchester City downed Marseille 3-0 to retain their top position in the group. Meanwhile, in Group D, Liverpool drew FC Midtjylland 1-1. While Atlanta beat Ajax 1-0.
And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.